24 through 28. This is the meeting for the draft 24 through 28 capital investment plan. I'm just going to give folks another little bit to join and then we'll get started. Okay, well, good evening, everyone, again, and thank you for being here. My name is Michelle Scott. I'm the manager of capital planning at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and tonight we'll be reviewing the contents of MassDOT's 24 through 28 capital investment plan with some highlights for the Central Mass region. At this point, to get things started, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Chris, who will review the meeting procedures.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Clem, and I'm one of the MassDOT producers alongside Raisa Kwame, who will help facilitate the question and comment section. Let's just take a quick minute to review your Zoom controls. On the bottom of your screen, you will find your audio settings. Your microphones are muted during the meeting, but you will have the opportunity to speak during the questions and comment session at the end of the presentation by using the raised hand function to indicate that you wish to speak. You can also rename yourself by clicking the participants button to open the participants list, finding your name, and then clicking rename. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, you can put them in the chat box and we will address them during the question and comment session. If you need to attend the meeting by phone, please dial 1-646-931-3860 and enter meeting ID 832-9225-5599. If you experience any technical difficulties and require assistance, you can dial 508-459-3314 or direct any technical difficulty questions to myself in the chat. Finally, you may view live closed captioning generated by Zoom by selecting the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. This virtual public meeting will be recorded. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation may choose to retain and distribute the video, still images, audio, and/or chat transcript. By continuing attendance with this virtual public meeting, you are consenting to participate in a recorded event. If you are not comfortable being recorded, please turn your camera off, keep your microphone muted, and refrain from chatting in the transcript box. If you prefer to excuse yourself from the meeting, you can find these materials at www.mass.gov/CIP. Please note that you are automatically muted upon entering this meeting. And again, we will have a question and comment session at the end of the presentation. And finally, all questions and comments are welcome and appreciated, but we do request that you refrain from any disrespectful comments. And with that, I will hand the meeting back to Michelle. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. So this slide gives a quick overview of the material that we'll be covering this evening. We're going to start off with a welcome from the metropolitan planning organizations that oversee the spending of federal dollars for transportation in central Massachusetts. These include the Central Massachusetts MPO, which is staffed by the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, and the Montechusett MPO, which is staffed by the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission. Following those words of welcome, I'll talk a little bit about what the CIP, Capital Investment Plan, is and describe the approach we use to create it and our strategic goals for this plan. I'll talk a bit about the relationship between the CIP and the State Transportation Improvement Program, which is another key policy and budget document that guides the spending of transportation funding, and the role of MPOs and transportation planning organizations, or TPOs, in that process. Then I'll dig in more to the content of the CIP, talk about our funding sources, the planned spending, and highlight some selected investments in central Massachusetts. I'll talk about how you can explore the content of the CIP through the resources we have online, our overall process for engagement, and then open it up to hear from you to get your feedback on this draft plan. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Sujatha Krishnan from the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission to give some words of welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to provide feedback on the capital investment plan that MassDOT is here to present today. And again, Michelle did mention that this is the planning document or the spending document for all the projects that exist in the state, but today they are willing to spend more time on projects in the Central Mass region. So please direct your questions to MassDOT that you have on these projects. Also, there's some important projects like Route 20, Charlton, Oxford, and the 49590 project as part of this document. So we are very excited to have MassDOT join us today to have this meeting and provide the opportunity to comment on this document. Thank you and welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Sujatha. Now I'd like to turn things over to Brad Harris from the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission to say a few words.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Just echo what Sujatha said about the document participation in this. I'd like to also tell people that if they are interested in getting more involved in the transportation planning process in either Central Mass or Montechusett, to contact the RPAs. We're available to contact us through mrpc.org. Our emails are there. You can send us something. But we want to encourage people to get involved and be part of the discussion process and help us determine transportation priorities in the region. And that's an important part of what we do, is getting these priorities for the communities in particular. The CIP is one of the many documents that we get involved with. And as stated, it'll show you a lot of projects that are being planned across the state and including in our region. But if you want to get down to specifics and more on the programming and priorities, it's being involved in that transportation planning process through the advisory councils we have. So if you are interested, please go to the websites, send us an email. We're more than willing to talk to you and discuss what needs to be done and how you can be involved in this entire process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brad. Now moving ahead to an overview of the CIP. So this document is one of the key budget and policy documents that we have at MassDOT that directs the spending of funding that we have from different sources on improving transportation capital infrastructure in Massachusetts. So this is an investment plan that we developed for a 5-year period, which we update on an annual basis, and it covers funding for a host of different capital expenditures, be they for project planning, construction, or ongoing maintenance to keep our system in a state of good repair. We also cover a diversity of different modes in terms of transportation, of course, including roadways, bridges, complete streets improvements that accommodate multiple modes, separated bicycle and pedestrian facilities, investments in our transit systems, our airports, the rail network, and the registry of motor vehicles. So as an overall framework for designing this document, you can see how we approach it in the diagram in the upper right-hand portion of the slide. So we start with 3 major priorities: reliability, modernization, and expansion. So reliability is really grounded in making sure that we're keeping our assets in a state of good repair. Modernization takes us a step further to make sure that we're providing a system that's safe, looking at ways to increase accessibility, and to develop the system in ways to accommodate economic growth. And finally, in terms of expansion, we're looking at either finding ways to add new modes to the system or expanding the networks for the modes that we have. For example, expanding the reach of our statewide bicycle and pedestrian network. To support the priorities that we have here, we have investment programs in each of these areas, and the funding that's designated for these different programs supports specific projects. And we'll talk more about those as we move later into the presentation. So to complement that 3-tier framework that I just spoke of for fiscal years 24 through 28, we have a number of strategic goals that we're emphasizing in the CIP. They include safety, which is really a focus on safety for all users and making sure that we're using a holistic, safe system approach when we're putting safety improvements in place. Second is climate stewardship. This is 2 components. The first is promoting investments that will help decarbonize the system and reduce greenhouse gases from transportation. The second being that we're adapting our transportation infrastructure to be more resilient in the face of climate change. That third goal area is equity. And as part of this, we're thinking about how do we promote investments that support expanding access to everyone and increasing opportunity for everyone through our transportation system. We also think about equity in terms of how we're engaging people in the CIP and involving them in that process. The fourth goal is tied to responsible asset management. This is really focusing on making sure that we're funding projects that'll preserve the system, modernize it, increase the system's performance, and help us to meet new needs and new challenges. So as I mentioned during that overview, I want to tie together the CIP and another key document, which is the State Transportation Improvement Program. I'm going to kind of talk through these using that nested circle diagram on the right-hand portion of the slide. So the State Transportation Improvement Program is focused specifically on federal dollars for roadway and transit projects. And the STIP that we have in Massachusetts is made up of the transportation improvement programs that are produced by our Metropolitan Planning Organization and Transportation Planning Organization partners throughout Massachusetts. And so these transportation improvement programs come together to form the STIP and detail federal investments plus associated state match to pay for those. Looking to 24 through 28, we're expecting to have a STIP that accounts for about $10.8 billion. So the CIP is inclusive of the STIP, but also goes beyond that to account for other investments. For example, in that next outer circle, we have federally funded investments that may not be included in the STIP. These include things like grants for airports that come from the Federal Aviation Administration, or grants for the rail network that come from the Federal Railroad Administration. The CIP also accounts for projects that may be funded through other sources, be they special obligation bonds or tolls, and all of that coming together to form a capital investment plan that, as you'll see later, amounts to about $15.4 billion over the next 5 years. So this slide captures a little bit more about our partners in this process, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations and Transportation Planning Organizations, which serve more rural areas. These are key transportation policy and decision-making bodies for each of the regions in Massachusetts. You can see kind of their coverage areas in the map on the slide, with the Metropolitan Planning Organizations being highlighted in blue and the Transportation Planning Organizations being highlighted in black. And they develop their TIPs, which are their, as I mentioned, are a big component of the CIP on an annual basis. These documents also cover a 5-year period. They reflect projects from three sources, the first being projects that are selected at that organization's discretion, projects that are selected with funds from MassDOT, and finally projects that are funded by the transit authorities that are operating in that region. And so all of these MPOs and TPOs have recently wrapped up their process for developing their 5-year transportation improvement programs, which again form an important component of the CIP. So I'd like to talk a little bit about funding specific to the CIP. I've alluded to some of these sources already, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here. So you'll see on this slide, we've got sources in 4 different categories. The first is federal funding. We get this funding in 2 ways. The first is through formulas that allocate funding to the various states in the United States. These are relatively predictable funding sources from year to year. They include reimbursements for construction costs from the Federal Highway Administration, federal transit dollars, funding from the Federal Aviation Administration, and funding from the Federal Railroad Administration. In addition to these formula dollars, states and localities can apply for discretionary grant funding. So these are competitive processes where states or localities will apply for funding for a specific project. In the event that funds are awarded to Massachusetts, the CIP will reflect those federal dollars and any required state match. So in addition to these federal funding sources, we have those specific to the state. We have state bond cap, which is supported by general obligation bonds that support transportation, as well as special obligation bonds that may support specific initiatives such as the Accelerated Bridge Program and now the Next Generation Bridge program. We also have toll revenues that can pay for some projects. These include tolls that are collected on the Metropolitan Highway System in the Boston area, Tobin Bridge also in the Boston area, and the Western Turnpike. And these revenues are used on a pay-go basis to fund improvements to these facilities. And then finally, we have kind of a grab bag of other funding sources that can support projects in the CIP. For example, the Central Artery Tunnel Project Repair and Maintenance Trust Fund, which supports ongoing improvements to the Central Artery in the Boston area. So I want to talk a little bit more about the federal formula dollars and supporting resources that we get, and the specific influence of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was enacted in 2021 and has had a big influence on recent CIPs. So one thing that this law does is set kind of those formula levels for the different states for a 5-year period. These shape our assumptions for what we expect to receive for 24, 25, and 26, and form the basis of our assumptions for what we'll receive in 27 and 28. And these, the bipartisan infrastructure law reflects an increase in these funds compared to previous bills. This guidance also helps determine how much funding we'll need to set aside to match those federal dollars from state sources. In addition to setting those formula funding levels for existing programs, the BIL also created a number of new programs that have particular relevance to some of the strategic goals we have for transportation. For example, the BIL established the PROTECT program, which is the Promoting Resilient Operations for a Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation Program. These funds are really geared toward transportation resiliency in the face of climate change. And so to help spend those funds, the 24 through 28 CIP includes a new resiliency program. Another example are funds coming from the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which focus in particular on supporting the availability of charging infrastructure along interstates. And MassDOT has developed a NEVI deployment plan to help spend some of those dollars. Finally, is another piece of that climate stewardship goal. The BIL has funded a carbon reduction program, and MassDOT is currently working with the Executive Office for Climate, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs to come up with a strategy for spending those dollars on projects that will help decarbonize the system. So in addition to these new programs, we're also seeing increases in funding in recent years for bridge improvements. This was something we noticed in last year's major planning documents and is carrying forward into this year. We're also seeing increased funding for transit programs that are designed to help transit travel for seniors and people with disabilities. One other major factor on the federal side is we're seeing increased availability of funding through these discretionary grant programs. The BIL in particular authorized approximately $110 billion for projects through these grant programs. And as I mentioned, if federal funds are awarded to MassDOT, the CIP will reflect these amounts in the associated state match. One other trend we're seeing on the toll revenue side is increased revenues for these toll facilities as traffic and demand starts to rebound, which has a related increase in toll revenue. So moving from here, this slide provides an overview of the spending that we have as noted in our draft CIP. Some cues based on color. The green that you'll see on this slide is reflective of reliability-oriented investments. The blue reflects those related to modernization, and the black reflects those related to expansion. And you'll see kind of in that top table, the funding in each of these priority areas by a MassDOT division and the MBTA. One thing I will note, while you will see some MBTA spending reflected here, this is really funding from the Commonwealth that's going specifically to the MBTA to support things like South Coast Rail, for example. However, the MBTA has its own separate capital plan. They've recently released their 24 through 28 capital plan, which has a much wider range of investments than those specifically funded by the Commonwealth here. So if you want to learn more about that, I definitely encourage you to check out the MBTA website. So kind of looking down into that bottom right-hand corner of the slide, you can see a summary of this funding that, approximately 15.4 billion. That's reflects the planned investments in the 24 through 28 CIP. As you'll notice, by comparison to the 23 through 27 CIP, this is about roughly 530 million more than in the prior 5-year period that we were looking at. And then finally, in that bottom left-hand corner in that pie chart, you'll see the relative share of investments in each of the priority areas, with approximately 83% of the total CIP being focused on either reliability or modernization investments. So just to tie back to something I mentioned earlier in the presentation, which is that we have specific investment programs that capture the spending for each of our priority areas. So what this slide does is show some examples of programs that are designed to advance these different priorities for each MassDOT division. So if we look at highway, for example, we have the bridge and interstate pavement programs that are designed to advance our reliability priority area. Resiliency is included in that as well. Taking that next step to modernization, we have programs such as those for Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA retrofits. Our Complete Streets program, which is designed to upgrade streets so they can better accommodate a variety of roadway users, and our Safe Routes to School program. And finally, looking to expansion, other examples include the shared use pass and bicycle and pedestrian programs that are really focused on expanding the reach of that statewide bicycle and pedestrian network to help support that expansion goal. So I do want to highlight a couple examples of programs that are really geared towards municipalities. So you can see kind of at the bottom of the slide, this is inclusive of the longstanding Chapter 90 program, which provides state aid to municipalities to support transportation improvements. To kind of expand beyond the offerings through the Chapter 90 program, we have, for example, the Shared Streets and Spaces program. This was initiated during the COVID-19 pandemic to help communities repurpose sidewalks, curbs, streets, and parking areas in order to make them support mobility that's safe, particularly for cyclists and pedestrians, which also can support public health by giving people spaces to travel outside, and opportunities for renewed commerce through activities such as outdoor dining. Other examples include our local bottleneck reduction program, which is focused on helping to address bottleneck issues at local signalized intersections. The Municipal RTA and Electric Vehicle Fleets program directs funding to help municipalities integrate electric vehicles and charging equipment into their communities as part of supporting that climate stewardship goal. Another example, the Municipal Small Bridge, which is focused on providing funding to address and provide improvements for small bridges between 10 or 20 feet long that may be structurally deficient or load posted. So a diversity of offerings to support municipalities through the CIP. At this stage, I want to highlight a number of investments specific to Central Massachusetts. So the way these slides are organized, we have information by MassDOT division, details about the location or specific facility, some description of the project, spending specifically in the upcoming fiscal year, which is fiscal year 24, spending over the 5-year CIP period, and then the estimated total project cost. So examples that you can see here are the taxiway improvements, for example, at the Fitchburg Municipal Airport, bridge repairs on the Ware River Secondary Rail Line. You can see for the transit authorities have investments such as vehicle purchases and facility improvements. One thing I do want to note, as you can see for the Montechusett Regional Transit Authority, there's planned purchases related to electric buses, which again helps supports the Commonwealth's climate stewardship goals. So this slide provides some examples specific to the highway division. Again, you can see for various municipalities in the Central Massachusetts region, highlighted projects with information similar to what was on the previous slide. We cover a variety of different modes in the CIP, and there's some different examples here. I believe Sujatha had referenced the our Route 20 improvements project in Charlton and Oxford. There's also the major investments planned and underway for the I-90, I-495 interchange in Hopkinton and Westboro. You can see bridge improvement examples, such as in Auburn, the bridge replacement on US 20 over I-395. Examples of local improvements to corridors in the area, such as the reconstruction of Route 56 in Rutland, or intersection improvements on Chandler Street and May Street in Worcester. We also have examples here of trail improvements, such as the Twin Cities Rail Trail construction project for Fitchburg and Leominster, and even for the Safe Routes to School program, for example, the Elm Street project that's happening in Gardner. So a diversity of different project types in the upcoming CIP. And again, this is just a snapshot of what's there, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can dig into more projects that are going to be happening in the area. So to explore the CIP in more detail, just wanted to touch a little bit on our document structure. So the first portion of that is an overview, which covers a lot of the material that I've discussed tonight, ranging from our approach to developing the CIP and our funding sources and major investments. Appendix A is a detailed list of all the capital investments that are included in the CIP for 24 through 28. And you can explore these by division and location, and the appendix will provide a lot of the similar information to what I showed for those project highlights in terms of description and spending. Appendix B covers our investment programs, and you can review that to learn more about details for each, including associated spending. So in terms of getting the word out about the CIP, we're taking a couple of different approaches to this. The first relates to how we're documenting the CIP. We have materials available in standard PDF formats, but we also have an interactive story map version of the CIP. Included in this is a number of interactive data visualizations where you can really dig into the spending and explore things that way. So we definitely encourage you to check that resource out. We've been holding a series of virtual public meetings focused on different regions of Massachusetts. Tonight's is the 6th and final meeting, and we've been working with our MPO and TPO partners to do that, and we're really appreciative of their participation in that process. Again, these meetings have followed a similar format with an overview of the CIP and some regional highlights in terms of projects. And so we really appreciated being able to get in touch with folks and share information about the CIP that way. And again, this is just a full list of the meetings we've held. Again, tonight is our final meeting, and some other ways that if you're interested in providing comment about the CIP as an alternative to speaking tonight, you can use the CIP comment tool that I'll talk more about in a minute. You can email us at masscip@state.ma.us. We also take physical letters if you'd like to send us information that way. And at the close of the presentation, I'll provide the address you can use to do that. As Brad and Sujatha highlighted, another great thing to do on an ongoing basis is to really stay in touch with your municipal leaders and your local regional planning organizations to keep them apprised of your priorities for transportation projects. And information that comes through those processes are things we consider as part of the CIP. So with all of these different ways to get engaged in mind, the specific comment period for this upcoming CIP started on May 18th and will close on June 9th, and that's this coming Friday. So just wanted to talk a little bit more about the comment tool. This is an interactive web-based tool that you can use to explore projects that are included in the CIP. There are a couple of ways to do that. There are filters that you can use to search by your MPO area or your local highway district. You can also explore by CIP program or MassDOT division. You can certainly click around on the map and explore projects that may be happening in your area or other areas of Massachusetts that you're interested in. You'll see in the screen cap here that the central part of the interface lists the projects that may come up through the filters or in specific parts of the map. If you click on the more info button that's featured here, it'll take you to an interface where you can see more information about the project, including planned spending, and a space where you can also provide written comments specifically on that project or upvote it if you choose to do that. And again, this is a resource that's going to be available through our website. It was available starting on May 18th and will be open through June 9th. So how do we use the feedback that we collect about the CIP, which is of course a really important component of this process for us. We do this in a couple different ways. First, focusing specifically on projects that are on comments that are on existing projects are shared with the relevant MassDOT divisions and their project managers there. And these can provide valuable input that's considered as these projects are developed or implemented. If there are comments in support of future projects that may not be currently in the CIP, those get shared with our MassDOT contacts as well. And these are considered as part of future CIPs or other opportunities to include them in the CIP because we're getting a sense of the level of public interest. For programs and priorities going up a level, we appreciate feedback about specific CIP programs. These help drive how we approach investments in future CIPs. And we also appreciate comments on the overall process, including how we engage the public, because we really want this plan to be reflective of the transportation priorities of people throughout Massachusetts. And so we definitely encourage feedback in any of these different areas. So there's one last engagement opportunity that I want to highlight tonight, and this is the Beyond Mobility Initiative, which is MassDOT's next statewide long-range transportation plan. And so this is a document that will reflect the most transportation priorities that'll be key between now and 2050. And it will also help set the direction of future capital planning and expenditures to make sure that we're helping to meet those needs now and in the future through investments that are performance-based, equitable, and aligned with the needs of the public. So this planning initiative has been going on for over a year now, and there's still a good chunk of it left to go and opportunities to participate if you're interested in doing so. So if you want to learn more, we encourage you to scan the QR code that's featured on the screen or check out mass.gov/beyond-mobility to learn more and figure out how you can get engaged. And at this point, I'd like to turn things back over to Chris to facilitate the comment and question section.
Thank you very much, Michelle. To ask a question verbally, please use the raise hand icon and we will give you access to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and share only one question at a time or no longer than 2 minutes so everyone has the chance to participate. You can also submit a written question or comment to the host using the chat panel and we will read them out loud. To ask a question on the phone, dial *9 and we will call out the last 4 digits of your phone number and unmute your audio. We would also welcome any comments or questions from elected representatives speaking in their official or unofficial capacity, as well as members of the public. I see Sujatha has her hand raised. Go ahead, Sujatha.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Michelle. I have a question. We've been noticing, obviously, statewide, nationwide increase in project costs, tremendous increase in project costs. Wondering how the CIP accounts for future increases in project costs, because some of these projects were programmed before. So just wondering if that was accounted for as part of the CIP.
Thanks, Sujatha. That's a really good question. I think one thing to mention too about the CIP is it's very much a cash flow oriented document, which makes it a little bit different from, say, the TIPS or the STIPs, which really focused on project obligations in specific years. So we're accounting for, particularly for projects that are already underway that have continued spending. In fiscal years 24 through 28, we go through a process with different divisions within MassDOT to look at expenditures that have already happened and account for projections based on those, upcoming expenditures. It's just one way we can kind of start to capture some of the near-term effects of, inflation and impacts to materials costs that may be happening on projects that are underway. For the projects that we're looking out ahead, I would say we're probably pretty aligned with the STIP in terms of the standard assumptions that MassDOT uses for project cost increases and inflation. And we do work really closely with the MPO activities team at MassDOT, which works really closely with the MPOs and the divisions within MassDOT to understand kind of cost impacts to projects and making sure we're accounting for those as we get new information and can incorporate it. So those are kind of the two ways that I'd say that we address that at this point. But we do acknowledge that is a huge factor that's really affecting opportunities and progress on implementing transportation projects, those cost increases.
Thanks for the question, Sujatha. I'd also welcome any other MPO members that we have in attendance tonight. You're welcome to ask questions as well. We have such a great resource here in Michelle. And again, if you need some more time to digest this information, it is all available online at mass.gov/CIP, and that public comment period runs through to this Friday, June 9th.
There are no other questions, Chris. Maybe we can move ahead to the closeout. I can
Sure.
remind people how they can provide some feedback if you'd like more time to dig into these resources.
Yep. Go ahead, Michelle. You can close this out. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. If you could bring up that last slide. So again, mass.gov/CIP is where you can find all the resources that we've shared tonight. Again, we're taking comments through our online comment tool, as well as by email at masscip@state.ma.us. If you would like to write to us, you can do so at MassDOT, Office of Transportation Planning, attention Manager of Capital Planning at 10 Park Plaza, room 4150, Boston, Massachusetts, 02116. And I really want to thank everybody for coming out and for your attention this evening. And thanks to our MPO partners, CMRPC as our host, and providing some welcome, along with Massachusetts providing some welcome as well. And I hope you all have a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.